What's an instance where the movie was better than the book? For me, this is one of the rare cases where the two works are so different that they can stand alone on their own merits. I love the film and actually like the changes they made to the story and tone of the novel, made it more sweet, etc. But the book is still one of my all-time favorites, simply because it's so batshit crazy. I think it's an absurdist masterpiece. It may not be intended to be like that, but every time I read it, I cry from how hard it makes me laugh. I highly recommend reading it if you want to try something different and insane. Just know that, while the characters and some situations are the same in the film, the two works are very different in tone and attitude. Yup, Spielberg said he realized that if more of the movie was the third act of the book, it would be a much better story, and he's right. We really don't need Hooper having an affair with the chief's wife, or the whole plot with the mafia threatening the mayor. The movie's explanation that the mayor doesn't want to lose tourist revenue for that reason alone just works a lot better. The Kubrick film is excellent, but the book provides something the movie doesn't, a Jack Torrance that has a lot of depth, and is a tragic figure. Book Jack truly loves his family, and it's sad seeing the Overlook prey on his weaknesses to drive him mad. Movie Jack is just an asshole right from the beginning, and hates his family. I have both the King and Kubrick film adaptations of The Shining in my DVD library and I enjoy them both for extremely different reasons. It's also just really interesting that King was so dissatisfied with Kubrick that he made his own movie largely out of spite but had to rescind all of his trash talking to get the project approved. I have to agree. I really love the novella, but Morgan Freeman and Tim Robbins were perfect as Red and Andy, and several parts of the novella had a lot more emotional significance on screen than they did on paper, with every part of the story coming to life. It was great as a novella, but the film is a masterpiece. The Princess Bride. A lot of people, including the producer, director, and cast of the movie, absolutely love the book. But I found it too sarcastic, making too much fun of the genre. The movie was the perfect balance of satire and homage. The book felt belittling. I seem to be in the minority on this opinion, so maybe I missed something? The original book Planet of the Apes had alien apes find a letter in a bottle floating in space describing the events of the book. It was an alien world. The apes were aliens. The movie changed the end with the Statue of Liberty reveal. They were in the future Earth. The original author stated he actually preferred the movie ending. If that is not an endorsement for changing the script. I think Fight Club the movie succeeds in that it is disturbing, but far more subtle and believable, and doesn't feel like it's attempting to be edgy. It just happens to be the world the narrator inhabits. Norton's Jack is more relatable than Book Jack, and you can see how he let things get so far, but in the book he's a lot more disturbed and willing to let things get out of hand. For instance, in the book Project Mayhem is far more blatantly villainous, following up on their threats to castrate threats and with the garden housing bodies of enemies of the project, and not just one unfortunate accident. That on top of other aspects of the narrator's personality and what he goes through, like meeting Tyler at a nude beach and stealing fat from Marla's rich mom, felt like it detracted from the message for the sake of being shocking. But pretty much like you said, Fight Club the book was designed to be intentionally disturbing, so it isn't surprising there's something uncomfortable around every chapter. I did like the extra angles to Marla, like her aforementioned rich and vain mother, and I'm kind of surprised they actually removed the stuff that made her more normal in the movie, but it works in service of the plot. On Marla, I so much like my personal pet theory that Marla in the movie is just another personality trait of the main character, where his real self is the boring, unhappy middle-class man, and his drive to just play the role in society, his suppressed sexuality, his conformity in good and bad, and it also is his sane, reasonable drive to live a stable life. He is self-victimizing. Tyler is his drive for anarchy, rebellion, destruction, chaos, an unchained sexual freedom, but also self-actualization and his individuality. He is trying to fix society, at least he thinks it can be fixed, and is victimizing basically everyone else but himself. Marla is his own drive for stopping giving a damn at all, about anything. His drive to be just a great person in society that no one notices, to just hide away like many people do, for his own suicide tendencies, to just stop it all. It is his drive for depression, for being moveless, pure neutrality, no victim, no offender, and maybe just die and be done with it all. This is going to become a stretch, but if you want to, you can ask, why is this character so broken in the first, and find an answer that he might have been abused in childhood. We all know Marla's line that goes in that direction, that Marla walks over the street trying to get hit by a car but it never happened, that Marla shows up right at the right moments, that Marla calls on the phone in her own suicide attempt, first gets the normal self, then gets Tyler who rescues her. That Marla shows up at the end makes total sense. It's his own suicide attempt we're seeing here, and it ends with the character deciding that this is not the way to resolve it. Marla's timings for showing up in the way she does simply is too good. It explains how Marla can have sex while the normal self is in the cellar, or how she just passes out when the normal self declines to finish her off, or all the other scenes where she interacts with Tyler or with the main character. There's simply no one at all in the house otherwise. This is, I think, reinforced by the fact that the character already had different pre-Tyler identities. That is all the stuff he wrote in the house as Jack, so even in canon we are already at 3 identities. Who is to say there are not more? And if there are more, it absolutely has to be Marla. When Tyler is gone, the character removes his will to do violence against society, and the character comes to peace with himself and finds a middle ground between him having to adhere to society's laws, even if he thinks them being broken, and stop caring about anything and wanting to die. So it's no problem he does not see through what Marla is, but it's good, and due to his wounds it might even be his dying insights. If you want to go that route to the very end, then Marla being there in peace and calm might indicate that he actually did chose to shoot himself, and by that end it, but for different, better reasons than before, since he did shoot Tyler in defense of himself and everyone else and not himself and giving up. At the very least he has accepted that he might die in doing the right thing, which curious is exactly what Tyler wanted him to learn in the accident scene. So if you go that route to the end, Tyler can go, because the character has learned and embraced the very lesson Tyler wanted to teach. Just live your life in awareness, then give up control and do the right damn thing, even if that might mean you live or die in it. I guess that's a more positive end. All this is totally not in the book, but I really like that the movie very much opens this angle. That was my answer too. They streamlined the whole liposuction storyline. And the ending too. They left in all the good and trimmed some of the fat, literally. Chuck Palahniuk, the author of Fight Club, even agrees the movie is better. Now that I see the movie, especially when I sat down with Jim Mools and record a commentary track for the DVD, I was sort of embarrassed of the book, because the movie had streamlined the plot and made it so much more effective and made connections that I had never thought to make. There is a line about fathers setting up franchises with other families, and I never thought about connecting that with the fact that Fight Club was being franchised, and the movie made that connection. Bourne Identity is both better than the book and also worse than the book. What I mean to say is that the book is great and the movie basically cuts out everything but the premise of an assassin losing his memory. So in that sense, the movie loses. However, the movie, despite being an entirely different thing, is amazing, and Matt Damon is amazing in it. The scene at the cottage in the snow is a vibe. Dick strikes me as a guy who would write about stuff he was thinking about. The Man in the High Castle, for example, has a recurring theme of it matters if something is the real thing or an imitation if you can't actually tell the difference, a theme he would explore further in Electric Sheep. I like that about him because you get a window into his thoughts. Robert E. Howard is another that I think really gave you a window into his mind with his writing. I tried taking a shot at it this spring, and I swear I could only read 10-20 pages before tapping out. It's brilliantly written, but insanely meticulous and sledgehammers the reader with every detail in such long dialogue that it makes Hemingway, Dickens, and Charlotte Bronte look like Cormac McCarthy. I also quit reading after the hamster scene. It was just a bit too much for me. I'll definitely try to get back to it one day, but I had to momentarily put it down. They omitted a final scene from Green Mile that wouldn't have taken more than a minute and would have made the book sadder. If anything, the few King adaptations I've watched omitted too much. For example, The Shining wasn't scary at all for little me, and the father was only an abusive asshole. Adult me couldn't shower in peace from fright when reading the book, and you could appreciate the dad having an inner fight. There are too many King adaptations to make a sweeping generalization like this. Books that are much better than the adaptation, adaptations that are better than the books, stories where both are very good, stories where both are very bad. Sometimes an adaptation does something very different but still works. King does need an editor with a backbone, though, and Hollywood needs to hire writers who understand the core of King's stories instead of just wow, scary. We really need Darabont to make another one. It feels like a common theme running through many of the movies adapted from his books. The science gets dropped in the movies. In Jurassic Park, they skipped over a lot of the math. Ian makes graphs to show that the dinosaurs are breeding. In the movie, Dr. Grant just finds some eggs. In The Terminal Man, they make computer simulations, but the movie spends more time on the detective work and catching a killer, rather than mathematical modeling. In Sphere, the book went into more detail about astrophysics so they can debate the ship's origins. Norman has a lot of inner monologues about psychology, but they're mostly missing, including his time in the Sphere itself. In Congo, the book talked about language a lot more. The movie takes a shortcut and just has some new text so Amy's sign language is converted to verbal speech, rather than have Peter interpret. The movies definitely lean on the action a lot more than talking that happens more often in his books. I know that I'm gonna get killed for this, but, call me by your name. Don't let me be misunderstood. I also really loved the book, but I think that the film adaptation handled some things way better, like the addition of the goodbye scene at the train station which I missed in the book. And of course the ending. The film ending broke my fucking heart, and a part of me wishes that the book ended in the same way. Still great book and movie though, would recommend reading, watching both. Yeah, the constant bursting into smoking, drinking song mirth really grates in the books, but I think it also serves a purpose, reminding us that the hobbits are, through and through, ever so innately joyful and good, which is a plot point, and that they're therefore less susceptible to the dark magic. The movies kind of fell down on the job of establishing that at all. Also the books have a nice ending that really should have been in the movies. Stairs, mouth agape. They cut entire characters and scenes. Important ones. Glorfindel, Bombadil, the Scouring of the Shire. More, they added scenes that simply never happened and added nothing to the story, like Aragorn falling off the cliff. They spent precious, film time on the love story between Aragorn and Arwen. It also made it Aragorn's central motivation. He didn't even carry the shards of Isildur's blade with him, as he'd given up on his family's history until the events of the movie. In fact, the whole Arwen-Aragorn thing is a mess in the movie. Elrond opposes the marriage, part of his general despair with men in general and Aragorn specifically for turning away from his path as the heir of Isildur. He and Arwen fight about the marriage, which is good film, I guess, but completely opposed to how it goes in the book. In the book, Elrond is Aragorn's foster father and loves him like a son. Rivendell is Aragorn's home, and Elrond smiles upon Aragorn's love for his daughter. Differences like this completely change the tone and character of the story, in my opinion, for the worse. Why do we need family conflict in the middle of a story already full of conflict? Wouldn't some stability and familial love add depth to the story? For me at least, the answer is yes. The deleted scenes you mention are a great part of the book but absolutely don't fit the movie at all. Imagine the hobbits running from the Nazgul and Fellowship, and before they get to Bree they have a scene with goofy Tom Bombadil. Would have hamstrung the film badly. Glorfindel adds nothing to the film progress. It is already a set of 3-hour-long movies. Kinda weird that they doubled down on Halter though. Scouring of the Shire really doesn't make a movie work, and even in the book, I know why it's there, but it just doesn't make for a coherent plot line. I always felt like Tolkien just didn't have a good enough way to end the Saruman and Wormtongue sequence and shoehorned it in there. I think the Aragorn and Arwen love story is terrific as it raises the stakes between the two, and Elrond's involvement humanizes him. It makes him more than a grumpy elf lord. Aragorn also has a struggle that we all can relate to as well. It's hard to imagine what it's like to be a reluctant king, but to not be with the woman you love brings Aragorn's struggles home. It also portrays Arwen's brutal struggle between her dad and love interest. I think the stability of the Hobbits' courage and loyalty to each other gives us the realistic foundation of hope and the source of triumph that a movie needs. The book version of Elrond, Aragorn, and Arwen doesn't translate well. One thing I won't ever get over in the films is Arwen's life somehow being tied to the ring. Da fuck is that about? Even if they stuffed some sentence about how Sauron has magic over elves remaining or some bullshit, that would work, but just saying that she is gonna die if the ring isn't destroyed makes no sense. All joking aside, the movies made some changes that turned them into two different kinds of stories. Similar plot, but different kinds of stories, and both have value, and I'm glad both exist. In the books, apart from the hobbits, the majority of the Fellowship weren't so much characters as caricatures. Well, no, that word has a bad connotation, but what I mean is that they were paragons. They were already more or less fully realized as to who they are and what they would be and what they could do, and so they didn't undergo any significant change as a character might. It was a cast of Ben Kenobi's, not Luke's. The movies tended to take the cast and make them characters, start them lower and make them change and become who they were in the books from the start. While there are many examples, probably the most dramatic and illustrative is Aragorn. In the books, Strider is just a mask. He's fully happy and ready to become king. He sees it as his birthright and something he's more than ready for, and anyone that isn't on board with immediately bowing down to him just hasn't heard the good news yet. As a mark of this, he takes Andúril with him when the Fellowship first leaves Rivendell, and makes a pretty big show of it wherever he goes. By contrast, in the movies, they made him the reluctant king rather than the eager one, whereas book Aragorn saw his lineage as a mandate to rule. Movie Aragorn saw it as a curse to bear. He doesn't think of having Izzet or strength, rather fears having his weakness. In that regard, Strider is who he is and a king is who he becomes when the role is thrust upon him. This gives him room to change. It gives a much greater dynamic between him and Frodo and Boromir and Theoden. And it gives us the amazing scene of him and Elrond in the shadow of the mountain, where he finally takes up the sword and commits to his destiny. He has a true arc, with internal doubt and struggle and triumph that goes beyond external hurdles, and through that he becomes the amazing guy we meet at Bree in the books. Arguably, the movie is more about the characters, while the book is more about the adventure, and personally, on a lot of parts I find the movies take to be more interesting and endearing, but more than that, I like that both versions exist, so you can enjoy the strong points each has to offer. Apocalypse Now and Heart of Darkness. The book, while ultimately good, is a bit of a slog, even at only 200 or so pages. Apocalypse Now adapts most of the main beat of the story and makes it far more engaging. even though depending on the version you watch it can be anywhere from 2.5 to 3.5 hours long. 365 days. For me, the movie had a bit more focus on the mafia family subplot, which gave the story its backbone. In essence, it forcibly balances the sex, romance with some action. I also appreciate that Laura is more of a fighter in the movie, whereas the book simply describes her as one while her actions constantly prove otherwise. It's a shame they are making a sequel because they will undoubtedly ruin a good thing out of a subpar romance novel. I prefer the movie's ending as well.